they thought that they were creating something very influenced, founded on a Christian concept. And now, and what I saw in Munich was a certain sense of tragedy or sorrow. There was a nostalgia for that era. Like the Western Alliance in 1950 was so strong, and everybody felt, and this is, I guess, in 2023, well, now it's so weak. And I was kind of struck by the fact that people weren't asking the question, well, what had really changed about the West from 1955 to 2023?
It's obvious what changed.
And it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's that our society's kind of lost that binding moral vision, that unifying moral vision, and they were trying to recapture all of the good things out of it without the underlying foundation. And they're almost, there was something, because I went into this conference and I remember I was kind of angry at them. I felt they were naive. I felt like they were dumb. I felt like they weren't really understanding what was really going on in the world. And I came out actually with this deep sense of respect, but also sorrow, because they're nostalgic for a world that doesn't exist anymore, but they can't quite bring themselves to get it back.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I have been waiting for this conversation between Bishop Barron and JD Vance for a while now. As you all know, probably from X or Twitter, however you want to call it. Bishop Barron announced a few days ago that he had a conversation with JD Vance. So it was released just a few hours ago. I've gone through the entire hour-long conversation, and I want to show you the specific part where Bishop Barron asks JD Vance about Donald Trump. So we'll start there, and then we will listen to their conversation for a while, and then I will react with what I think is so important with what they are both saying. Let's go.
Let's stay with that for a second. I'm intrigued by how the two great parties in our country, have changed a lot in the last maybe 25 years.
Sure.
How did Trump most change the party of, let's say, Ronald Reagan? The first election I was able to vote in was Reagan, 1980.
Yeah.
I was 20. And, the people that trained me were very much shaped by JFK and the Civil Rights Movement and the Peace Corps. And all that. My generation, it was Watergate, it was the end of the Vietnam War, it was the Carter malaise, et cetera. For our generation, my generation, Reagan comes along as this great, sunny, optimistic figure, and does bring the country back to greater economic health and so on. How has the party changed from, let's say, Ronald Reagan, 1980 to now? What's the biggest change? The Republican Party.
There's a lot there, but I do think the single biggest change is in the way that President Trump thinks about the economic development of the country versus President Reagan. And again, I think we're all in some ways subjects of our time. I don't mean this as a great criticism of Ronald Reagan, but I do think that this idea that globalization in the economy was just an inevitable law that was going to march along. And to the extent that your economic policy mattered, you should be facilitating it rather than pushing back against it. And I think what President Trump has brought is a recognition, obviously I agree with this, a recognition that there is a national and community element to economics.
Yeah.
That, if you look at it again, purely by the economic numbers, it doesn't matter whether your antibiotics are manufactured in China or whether they're manufactured in Milwaukee or Indianapolis. But if you look at it from the perspective of what actually makes nations strong, of course you have to manufacture antibiotics closer to home, because if, God forbid, there was some conflict or even just a COVID-like supply chain disruption, you don't want to wake up in a country, as we did in late 2020, where our doctors didn't have enough hospital gowns and hospital masks because of the supply disruptions. So I think there's just this recognition that, you can buy and sell with other countries, you can trade with other countries, but you have to have some native economic self-sufficiency. And that is a big difference. If you go back to the early Reagan eras, if you look at what Milton Friedman was writing about economic policy at the time, there are a lot of things where he would say, particularly like, let's say, tariffs to protect your pharmaceutical industry. Milton Friedman would say, that's insane. I think that Donald Trump clearly had the better of the argument then. I don't know how you even, again, I'm biased, but now the president's saying, of course we have to protect our pharmaceutical industry, our steel industry. That has now, I think, become almost conventional wisdom, to the point where, one way of measuring success politically is, at what point does a given idea become broadly accepted.
Yeah.
And then it's just a question of how to accomplish it. So if you go back to, one of Reagan's great successes, Bill Clinton famously said the era of big government is over, right? He had sort of won that argument to the point where even the Democrats were mirroring his talking points. If you look today in 2026, Democrats may disagree about how we're doing it, but everybody pretty much agrees we have to bring more of our industry back to the United States of America. We have to be more self-sufficient.
It's funny you mentioned Milton Friedman. I'm dating myself, but I remember this interview with Phil Donahue. The younger people don't remember Phil, but he was, this talk show host.
Sure.
Had serious people on. And Milton Friedman was an older man at the time and treated Donahue like a bright but not very well-read, sophomore.
Yeah.
And was laying out, the fundamentals of the very laissez-faire, hands-off economic approach. And it's an entertaining interview. But it strikes you as that's not Catholic social teaching. I mean, we believe in the market.
That's right.
We do. We don't like socialism. We don't like we believe in the market, but a market regulated in a morally alert manner, something like that. And I think that's what you're gesturing toward there.
That's right.
Tell me, but I asked the same question to Rokan. I had him on my show. I talked to Tom Swazi about this. I'm from Chicago originally. I'm an Irish Catholic, which meant Democrat. My family was involved in Democratic politics in Chicago. Roe v. Wade had a lot to do with Catholics getting uneasy with the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
But what has happened like the last about 10 years where the Democratic Party today, it seems to me, is one that my father would not even recognize?
Sure.
Give me, what's your read? What happened to sort of, in my judgment, sort of radicalize the party?
Yeah, so I think a few things have happened. First of all, I do think that the most fundamental change is religious. And my grandparents were classic Blue Dog Democrats. My grandfather was a Union Steelworker. This is the man who raised me.
Like a Scoop Jackson type Democrat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, voted for Reagan in '84 and otherwise never voted for a Republican ever in his entire life.
Right.
So what happened, though, is if you go back to that Democratic Party in the 1980s, and I actually talk about this, I think, some in the book, that, religious identification, religious attendance, both Republicans and Democrats were equally Christian.
Yeah.
They may have went to different churches.
Right.
And obviously, Jewish Americans at the time were more in the Democratic Party than the Republican Party, but there's still just this sense of we're like a broadly speaking ecumenical, God-fearing country. You see that in both the Democrat and the Republican parties. I think that what has happened is that religion itself has become very disfavored among Democratic elites, in some ways for the reasons that I talk about in the book. And I think one of the really troubling trends in Democratic politics, and I always ask this question when I think about who is a really compelling Democratic politician on the other side, I always ask myself, who are the black candidates who came out of the black church? Because that is such a core anchor of the Democratic Party in this country. And if you look today, like go to the U.S. Congress and ask yourself, what Democrats under 50 came out of the black church? The answer may be none.
You won't find any.
The answer may be none. So I do think that what has happened is that Christianity has always had this moderating influence on politics, and unfortunately, the Democrats have become less and less comfortable with any sort of religious role in politics. And I think that's, again, as Jesterson said, that doesn't mean they believe in nothing. That means they believe in anything. And I think you see that very much in today's modern Democrats.
Yeah. I mean, look at somebody like Martin Luther King. So the civil rights movement is not just participated in by religious people. It was led by religious people. Explicitly gospel-based people.
Yes.
King gives the great speech on the steps of Lincoln Memorial and effortlessly weaves together American themes and biblical themes.
Absolutely.
Letter from the Birmingham City Jail, same thing. Weaves together American civil rights activism and Thomas Aquinas.
Right. Like a super theological letter from Birmingham Jail is a super theological argument. People underappreciate that.
And I gave a talk at the 250th thing on the mall, and I made that point because I was saying just as Jefferson, these rights come from the Creator and we're created equal and so on. That's what King saw as well, that the American ideal is grounded in a finely biblical ideal. It's not theocracy, it's not the imposition of religion, but it's the information of the political by the religious. And I would agree with you there that's been lost in a lot of our political discourse and convictions.
That's right.
Tell me a little bit about. I have a quote here from you when you went to the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting gathering on some of the leading lights in politics, economics, the military too, I suppose.
Yep.
Here's your quote. It was Western Christian civilization and the values particular to it, the concept of natural rights, including freedom of speech, a sense of duty to one's neighbors, an obligation of the strong to protect the weak. Meaning that's that undergirded the convictions.
Correct.
And that's that's been lost.
That's right. Yeah, so this is a very formative thing for me. So I just become a United States Senator.
Yeah.
I was young, I was sort of up and coming, and I go to the security conference, which really it's the defense conference in the world, especially for the United States and its allies. And of course, the Ukraine conflict is sort of top of mind there in Munich, but there are a lot of other sort of bigger and deeper questions, like what does the Western Alliance stand for? And what I realized is there is an extraordinary Christian foundation to the entire Western Security Alliance. Like the person who founded the Munich Security Conference was one of the Christians who was involved in the attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And he was one of the few who survived. But then you actually look at, that early post-war Western Alliance. Look at Eisenhower, some of the things that he said. I mean, he would be
religious.
He would be called a theocrat if you gave anything like Eisenhower's speeches today.
Or Konrad Adenauer on the German side, right?
Absolutely. But all of these Western leaders, they thought that they were creating something very influenced, founded on a Christian concept. And now, and what I saw in Munich was a certain sense of tragedy or sorrow. There was a nostalgia for that era. Like the Western Alliance in 1950 was so strong and everybody felt, and this is, I guess, in 2023, well, now it's so weak. And I was kind of struck by the fact that people weren't asking the question, well, what had really changed about the West from 1955 to 2023?
It's obvious what changed.
And it's obvious, right? Yeah. It's that our society's kind of lost that binding moral vision, that unifying moral vision, and they were trying to recapture all of the good things out of it without the underlying foundation. And they're almost, there was something, because I went into this conference and I remember I was kind of angry at them. I felt they were naive. I felt like they were dumb. I felt like they weren't really understanding what was really going on in the world. And I came out actually with this deep sense of respect, but also sorrow, because they're nostalgic for a world that doesn't exist anymore, but they can't quite bring themselves to get it back.
Wow, that was a super fascinating point, that this Munich conference, and I think this can definitely connect to us as well, is nostalgic for a world that they have no idea how to get back. It was really interesting to me how this conversation started with Trump and basically Bishop Barron asking JD Vance here, what went wrong with conservative politics? What went wrong with liberal politics? And it was interesting how, so the Trump vision is all about this idea of, having native influence within our country to kind of bolster it economically. But in his reflection on what went wrong in the liberal side, they lost religion. And it's so obvious, as they were saying there towards the end, it's so obvious that that is kind of what has happened. I guess the question for me that kind of arises within my mind is that necessarily true of the conservative party too? Because you can see on the conservative side, let's say wokist, moralistic principles, even on the woke right, there is acceptance of gays, or, there's a different moral vision, just in a conservative flavor that is different than a Christian principle. What do we have to get back? I think that's the question that they're ultimately getting at here. And what we need to get back is that Christian vision. As JD Vance said here, like even Eisenhower, when he was talking, would have sounded like a theocratic individual. And that's really interesting, that the biggest thing that has changed within our society is getting rid of the religion that grounded the moral vision. And it's even more than that, because as JD Vance is saying here at the end, the elites, those that are in charge with kind of bolstering society with a moral vision, are nostalgic for a type of world that has the principles of a Christian Judeo worldview, but they don't want to actually have the foundation that actually leads to it. And so it leads to a very interesting, difficult, even as JD Vance says here, a sorrow that is created because you realize that the people are good willed, but they have no idea how to actually bring it into fruition. And I think the answer ultimately, this is the daily dose of Christ after all, is Jesus. If you don't have faith in Jesus, it doesn't matter how good-willed you are. Even it doesn't matter how um, grand the picture in your mind, the nostalgic vision you have in your mind for a better world is, because without Jesus, what ultimately can this world produce other than, a fabricated morality, a fabricated society built on nostalgic principles that can never actually be actualized within the world? And so we need Jesus, y'all. And I don't think even within our documents, like this idea of religious freedom, and this is kind of a touchy issue, I know, especially because I think both of them are kind of for the idea, because how else do you have an American society? And do you need to be um, so aligned with what the Constitution says if you're a Christian? These are all kind of touchy issues, but I think what we need to see is that even this idea of religious freedom doesn't really work because Jesus is king, right? But then again, how do you navigate that reality that Jesus is coming back, Jesus is ruling and reigning, everything flows and stems from him, but also not killing other people, as we see, you know, kind of in the rise after the Reformation, for example. Let's just get rid of all of this religious stuff that leads to violence. And let's just try to be nostalgically moralistic and virtuistic without any type of faith. And I think what we see is that no, we really do need faith because we need that foundation. But even more particularly, we need the Christian faith, because without the Christian faith is what actually substantiates those principles. Um, in the first place. And what we see, I think, in this clip is that both Bishop Barron and JD Vance are advocates of that kind of position. Again, that doesn't mean we get rid of other religions. What it does mean is that we know that our society is built upon Christian Judeo values, right? Especially the Christian ones that believe that Jesus is the Messiah, has resurrected, ascended, and rules and reigns from heaven in the hearts of those that he infuses with his grace. Right. And I think it's great that we have a bishop that talks like that. I think it's even better, at least in this type of political conversation, that we have a vice president that thinks like that. Maybe JD Vance will be the president here in the near future. I certainly would like it the way that he's talking in this clip. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. God bless and peace.